Many thanks to Nadira and to Nazanin. Let's move directly to our top story. Teachers in England will not have to address pupils by their chosen pronouns. This is under the government's long-awaited transgender guidance. It also says schools don't have to accept all requests for social transitioning, and the teachers should inform parents if their child wishes to change their gender identity. The Department for Education says the guidelines, which are not compulsory, will assist teachers to act in the best interests of pupils. They'll now be subject to a 12-week public consultation before they're finalised. Well, joining me in the studio now is Shavani Dave, a presenter on Virgin Radio, good to see you,
Hello.
and trans advocate. And down the line, I'm joined by Sian Griffiths, education editor at the Sunday Times. So why don't I start with Shavani, because you're here, it's good to see you. Do you think that the guidelines, which I know you have read carefully, will help pupils who are struggling with gender identity, considering transitioning, trying to work out who they are, as all kids always are anyway? Will this help them?
Absolutely not. No, I don't think so. I think what's happening here is things like suggesting that if you come out at school, the teachers will have to inform your parents. Things like if you come out of school, you won't necessarily be referred to by the name and the pronouns that you ask to be referred to by. Those things kind of say to a student, well, be who you are, try it, but we might not be safe because we might then expose that element of your identity to somebody that you're not ready to share that with yet.
Right.
And I think that's going to make things really, really difficult for young people who are exploring who they are. At that sort of school age, people want to see who they are and work out their identities. And I think it can be really powerful to have a trusted teacher or somebody at a school that you can go to and sort of just speak to, not necessarily even get advice from, just sort of say, this is what I'm feeling. But these kind of insinuations from the guidelines is kind of makes me feel like if I was a student today, I wouldn't want to be talking to my teacher about any of this.
Well, one of the things that is kind of slightly surprising to me, at any rate, is that this is very much being billed as parent-focused, whereas you would imagine that what this is really about is the child and the child at school and the child's relationship with other children, other pupils, the teachers, and the child's identity at school. So to make it parent-focused, while I absolutely understand why a great swell of opinion would think, listen, you don't want a child transitioning at school or changing pronouns without the parents being informed. I get that people would definitely consider that that is important. I'm still surprised that it's being billed as parent-focused rather than child-focused.
Yeah, I 100% think that this kind of guidance needs to be child-focused. I think when you're talking about anything in a school setting, it needs to be focusing on what students need, what those children need, to enable them to learn and develop in the best possible way that they can. And I think this guidance kind of misses that core principle. I think when we consider the idea of a teacher telling a parent that their child is saying that they're trans at school and transitioning at school, it also takes agency away from that young person. It means that they're forced to do something before they're ready. And when we see these kinds of things happening when it comes to gay, lesbian or bisexual people, we know that it's wrong and we talk about the fact that it's wrong and that shouldn't be happening and people should be allowed to come out when they're ready. Now, if that is not something that is also applied to young people just because they're at school and just because the person that they trusted to tell was their teacher. There's a sort of interesting thing there that in my head where it doesn't quite compute.
But I suppose people at home watching and listening to us talking about it now might think, well, if a young person tells their teacher, I'm transitioning or I want to transition or I'm considering gender fluidity in some way and I think I'd like to have my name changed from Paul to Pauline or whatever it is and I think I'd like to be called they, them instead of she or he, and is telling the teacher this, I suppose people listening might think, well, that means that that young person is coming out. That person has decided to say to the teacher, I want a kind of different identity at school. I'd like to be treated differently. I'd like to have, be a different person to some extent. And so therefore the person has already made the decision to come out. Would you say that's not right?
Yeah, no, they've come out, but they've come out to that teacher. They've perhaps not yet come out to their parents. Right. So what you're doing in saying to a teacher, oh, well, now you can go and tell their parents, you're stripping them of that opportunity. And for me, when I came out to my parents, it was a really nerve-wracking, emotional, tense moment, but it was a really beautiful moment as well, because I was ready. I was emotionally ready. I was mentally prepared. I was able to express to them how I feel and who I am in my own words. And I think there was something so powerful about me being able to have that moment. And I think, luckily for me, it went well. My parents were very accepting. For lots of children, that won't be the case. And it's up to the child to know how things will go in their family. I think these are the kinds of scenarios that really do need to be led by the young person.
Absolutely. Tell me a little bit about what it takes, what might be going on inside a child's mind, inside a child's heart. What is happening to this person, this young person, to prompt them to find a teacher and say, do you know, I'm thinking of transitioning, I'm thinking of, changing gender, I'm thinking of identifying differently, I'm telling you, I'd like you to change the way you talk to me, or something like that. What's going on inside that child at that point?
Yeah, so I can talk about my experience. I'm sure there'll be lots of different experiences for other people, but it's incredibly nerve-wracking. It's a moment of real vulnerability, and it's a moment of power as well. It's a moment of feeling confident within yourself to say something out loud that you've probably been keeping quiet for quite a while. There's possibly a level of fear. There's possibly a level of worry that maybe that person won't accept you, or you will never be accepted, you will never be loved, you will never have community or family. And there is some sort of genuine concern in that. We do see some of these experiences happen where people get rejected by their families, and that's really devastating. But to be able to open up and say, this is who I am, and I want to let you know who I am so that you can be involved in my life, I think is a really powerful, really beautiful thing to do to someone.
Let me bring Sian Griffiths, the education editor at the Sunday Times, into this discussion. Sian, thanks for joining me on the programme. What do you think is the purpose of these guidelines? What is the government trying to say and trying to do?
Well, I think schools have been put in a really difficult position in recent years. There's been an explosion in the number of children who are questioning their gender identity. There are about 8,000 children now coming forward to the England's only gender identity clinic for children at the Tavistock in London. And that compares with, maybe a few dozen 10 years ago. And schools have ended up having to decide when children come forward saying, I want to be known by a different name, different pronouns, biological girls saying, I want to wear a boy's uniform, I want to use, boys' toilets or play sports with boys. And schools have been put in this really difficult position of trying to work out what to do. I mean, should they allow children to do this or not? Sometimes the children say, I don't want you to tell my parents about this. And so this guidance is really helpful. It's very long delayed. It's been very contentious. And I think what it tries to do is say to schools, look, this is not statutory advice, but these are recommendations that we expect schools, every school, to do the same thing. And essentially what this guidance is saying is take a really cautious approach. If a child comes to the school and says they want to socially transition, be really cautious about it. It should happen only in rare cases. In primary schools, the guidance seems to suggest it shouldn't happen very often at all. The guidance also makes it very clear that single-sex spaces have to be protected. So girls' toilets have to be protected, girls' changing rooms, when people go away on residential trips, girls' dormitories, girls' rooms, that all has to be protected. And I think the guidance goes a long way towards addressing what I've been hearing for a long time now from parents who will ring me up and say, my child's transitioning, the school didn't tell me, I'm really worried. And the reason that many parents get worried is that when children socially transition, it's possible that they then are more likely to follow that through and medically transition as well. Now, that would mean taking puberty-blocking drugs, possibly cross-sex hormones, and then when they're adults, maybe go on to have surgery to change their bodies. So, for instance, mastectomies and so on. And I think when parents call me and want to tell me their stories, usually they do it anonymously, that is the big concern that they have, that are their children really understanding at the age of 13 or 14, when they say they want to socially transition at school, do they understand where this might lead?
Do you accept that caution is a good idea? Take it slowly. Don't say, okay, great, right, we'll call you this, we'll call you that, you can wear this. Right, from now on, you're a different person and we'll treat you as such. There are teachers, I'm sure, who would do that. They would be so keen that this young person was heard and seen and listened to and didn't feel in any way shunned or bad. And they'd realise that they'd really taken a huge step in even approaching them. And so they'd get the whole thing sort of done and dusted by lunchtime. Like, right, class, now we're going to call, Paul, Paulina, we're going to, that kind of thing. Do you think that it is probably wise that caution and slowness and, considered approaches are better than kind of plunging in? Or do you think by the time the child has approached the teacher, the child knows exactly what he or she wants to do and how he or she feels?
Yeah, I think when the child approaches the teacher, they probably do know how they feel. They probably do know what they want. And they probably are going, it's hard to talk about this in general terms because it's a situation where child in Northampton might have a very different experience to a child in Manchester who might have a very different experience to a child in Yorkshire. They might all be trans kids at school, but they might all want different things or say different things. And I think this is the kind of situation where we have to let it be led by the child in terms of what they need and what they want. And there needs to be that support there. Teachers need to be able to listen and hear those children. But I think, I agree in the sense that child comes out at lunchtime throwing a gender reveal party for that child
Exactly.
at the end of the school day is probably a little bit extreme.
Yes.
But I think that's why it's really important to have teachers, to have these adults that you can trust, you can turn to speak to this child about what's going on, and you can have that teacher, that person sort of be reasonable in the way that they can support this child, And
I'd like to say that I'm very grateful to both of you, actually, for having such a measured, kind, considered discussion about something that is so sensitive and is something that very many people are concerned about, interested in, maybe in some cases a little frightened by, a little perplexed by. So this kind of discussion, I hope you'll agree, I think you will, that we've just had has to be the way forward, doesn't it? Where we're just listening to each other, we can hear carefully what everybody else is saying, and all we really have at our hearts is what's best for the children concerned. That's certainly what I would care about more than anything else, and I'm sure that you agree.
I think the kids are the ultimate priority.
Exactly, and Sian, I know you agree as well. So thank you all both.
Absolutely.
Thank you both. It's really been a pleasure talking about it, particularly in this way. Thank you very much indeed. Coming up after the